Hello and welcome to Art School Live with me, Charlie Easton, standing in for Eric Rhodes again today. Had fun yesterday with Laura Bufano. Today, we've got a great show for you, another Canadian for you. This time, we have Samantha Williams-Chapelsky, who is a tremendous kind of abstract landscape painter who uses tons of really interesting, gooey acrylic mediums. You're going to love her work. She's represented by galleries here in Canada, US. She's demonstrating across the world these days and has just come back from teaching in Italy. So you're going to have to bear with her as she's jet lagged. But you know what? I think she's going to do a great show. Judging by the color of her shirt, she's ready for it. Samantha, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, Charlie.
Yeah, great to have you on. I'm really pumped about this co-hosting for Eric because I get to invite people that I really want to hear from. So, Samantha, I've long admired your work, and we met down at the Plein Air Convention down in Denver a little while ago, and that was super fun. And I am looking forward to hearing from you. What are you going to teach us today?
So today I'm going to be showcasing how to create movement in a landscape painting using textured acrylics.
Right on. Let's get this thing started.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes.
Okay. Although it's not Eric Rhodes, is it? We said this yesterday. We said it again this morning. Eric is off traveling, and I think we will have an update on where Eric is right now a little bit later on in the show. But as I said, I'm Charlie Easton. You can see my work. It's at charlieeaston.com. Or my handle on Instagram is @CharlieEaston, so you can see who I am. I've done a bunch of stuff with Streamline, and I was thrilled to get invited because, as I said, I get to invite some people that I really want to hear from. And Samantha Williams-Chapelsky is definitely one of those people. She's going to teach us how to create movement in a landscape painting. And I think I should probably shut up and just let Samantha have a go and show us how she creates these incredible things.
No, thank you so much. I'm really excited to showcase a little bit of my technique. I've worked with acrylics for the past 20 years, and I really think they have so much potential to create movement, to create drama, and of course, they're a little bit faster drying. So those of you who are plein air painters will either love them or hate them. For me, I definitely have a love of acrylics and how they move on a surface. And today I'm going to be showcasing that with a really fun little plein air or sort of plein air landscape that I took, and having some fun with this. So my reference photo is here. I just wanted to show you, I mixed up a little bit of my colors already for acrylics. It looks like a bit of a mess. I totally understand that, but it's nice to have some pre-mixed colors. I am using molding paste in my work. So acrylics plus molding paste to give it a little bit more drama, a little bit more texture, which is really fun with your acrylics. It also spaces out your pigment, so it gives you a little bit more bang for your buck by mixing in these mediums. For those oil painters in the group, I really highly recommend oil and cold wax for a similar effect. You're looking for a little bit more textured application without adding to the drying time of your traditional oil paints as well. So I'm excited to get started. So
Hey Samantha, can you just hold up that palette again and we just have a little look at the colors you got them there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I pre-mixed all of these with molding paste. So the molding paste is an opaque product. So it does add a small amount of white to my paint. One of the nice things about it though is sort of what you see is what you'll get. So there's no real shift in drying colors. So you're actually going to get these colors once they're dry. But they will dry satin, so they will not have that high shine acrylic finish that maybe turns people off of acrylics. They're super shiny. They look like plastic. These will actually end up with a more satin finish to them.
Okay, cool. And you've got a bunch of, you got some warms and some cools, and I'm sure you're going to tell us what you're using and when. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the so molding paste and modeling paste, exact same term, just different brands being used, of course. We all always have to have different names for different things.
That's right.
Which is always challenging as an artist. So I did do a brief sketch, just really simplified my composition here. And because we want to create movement, we really want to have this space sort of planned out ahead of time, because I am using bigger tools. So things like palette knives I will be using, as well as some brushes. I always recommend using sort of a mid-range brush, not a super expensive brush, because your acrylics do beat up your brushes a little bit as well. So don't use your squirrel oval mop on these. Please choose a little bit more of a stiffer bristle-on or a stiffer fiber brush if possible. So I'm going to get started, if that's okay with you, Charlie.
Do it. Can't wait.
All right, so I'm going to start just sort of getting in my placement of some of the bigger shapes. I do use big tools for this purpose. I do have some really lovely blues up top, so I'm going to be popping these in. It does look like a lot of product, but it really isn't at the end of the day. It's a lot of paste more than it is paint.
Mm. And so, you're working on a birch panel there. It sounds like it's kind of crunchy.
Yeah, so it's a birch panel, and what I like about using a birch panel instead of sort of a canvas for this is we just get a little bit more of that texture on the surface, so there's no real sucking in of the product. It's just a little bit more holding on the surface. So I'm basically plopping colors down. I do work very general to specific, so like most painters, I'm going to put in the big shapes first and then go into more of the more detailed areas after. But the acrylics that I'm using right now, I have a cerulean blue plus a little bit of white added into just the molding paste. And then I am using some darker colors as well. So I've got an ultramarine blue in here as well. So it seems like a lot of stuff. I promise you, it's not that much.
Whoa. That's a lot of material.
It is. Again, your kind of cost savings method here is, of course, we're using a lot of product right off the bat, but we're able to really maneuver it and get it moving across the surface. Go into a little bit more of that transition area here, because we are doing a bit of a sunset, or a sunrise, I should say, image that I pulled from one of my recent trips. I do love to work from photos if at all possible. It just helps me with sort of that reference, or plein air style if I can. And then I do take my smaller plein air studies and add them to sort of my grouping of stuff that I want to paint from in larger scale.
So you're looking at your reference and you're mixing separated colors here right now. I'm assuming you're not trying to get your blue into your yellow, for example.
No, so I try to do one big area at once. So sort of the biggest area first, the furthest back, obviously my sky is going to be number one. And to create movement, I do find that bigger areas first, sort of like a multiple choice test, really using the bigger marks to really highlight more of that internal working. So when we get into the movement areas, when we're really playing with these, we can really showcase why these big marks sort of highlight the smaller marks. So again, some of the general marks being just as important as the really specific detail. And, Charlie, honestly, one of the things that I really love hearing from you, and I've always said to my students along the way, is really making sure you have some sort of focal point, knowing where that is, knowing sort of what your aim is with this painting. So how do you want to approach it? Where are you going to take it? And I think that's a really important part of this process for me.
Cool. So your focal point in this is going to end up with, we can see your reference on the screen here. The focal point is going to be ending up somewhat near the sun or the horizon line.
Yeah, so I'm looking for something right about here. That sort of all the lines sort of run into that area. So I love having that sort of effect of basically your lines converging, and we're sort of using a couple compositional tricks like the S shape, sort of pulling into that space. So again, compositional tricks as well as, general colors and things like that help us get to that area.
Okay.
So again, pretty loose right now, not really going too detailed, but you can see I'm blending a little bit of my colors along as we go. So some of my orange is definitely blending up into the sky, which is really fun to start pulling these colors together. And again, I'm still using my larger tools at this point. I don't want to shrink down to smaller tools. You do notice that I am wiping off a lot of product. If this is ever a concern for any artist, you can have like a junk board or a spare board, and you can actually put this right onto the spare board and paint on top of it later. It just becomes additional texture to work on top of. And then one thing I did want to mention too, if you are an oil painter, one of the most amazing surfaces you can actually work on top of is just molding paste. So molding paste or modeling paste, whichever, they actually have marble dust in them. So with that marble dust, we actually have a really smooth surface that can create really sort of easy to paint surfaces for your oils. It's almost slippery, which is really lovely. So if you're looking for a new surface to try, you can just use molding paste, which works really well as well.
And put that down with color in it, or put it down just plain. Make sure you know where your texture is going to be, and then paint oil over the top.
Yeah, so either or, you can tint it. So if you wanted to tint it even sort of like a warm neutral, so you wanted to use yellow ochre, you could tint it before applying it, or you could leave it as is. It's a little bit of an off-white color, so it's not pure white, but it is quite beautiful. And again, because it's got that slippery surface, we end up with such a really beautiful effect happening from it. So, so I'm going to start pulling into here because I know I've basically got to get these mountains in place. So this is, again, one of the colors that I pre-mixed is just sort of a bit of a cooler-ish blue. And it will warm up as I add a bit of that yellow to it. Typically my work these days is quite large, so this is on the smaller scale for me. So these are actually some of the palette knives that I'm using are typically for larger pieces, but it's nice to be able to get them done sort of quickly and get the product on the surface.
Great. And you're on a 24-24 there or something? Or is
this is an 18 by 18.
18 by 18.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do that.
Few people online have got palette knife envy. That looks like a good one.
Well, it's interesting. So a lot of my current work, if you follow me on Instagram, I actually use brooms and trowels. Those are some of my biggest tools, and like push brooms, which are quite fun. And I find them really sort of fun to play with your acrylics this way. So it's kind of an interesting thing to start thinking about other tools. I think as artists, we've forgotten artists of the past like Helen Frankenthaler and Jackson Pollock were artists who used found tools, so things like mops and brooms and sponges. So it's kind of interesting to remember those days of the past.
Well, I was going to say to everyone, because you're a working artist for golden acrylic, but maybe you should be the working artist for Home Depot. I mean,
right.
It sounds like you're going to need to go to the garden section to get these tools.
Yeah. Trowels, bricklaying brushes are some of my favorites. So yeah, it's interesting when we start switching out our tools. Even a new palette knife, if you haven't tried something larger, sometimes that can really sort of inspire your practice. And I think that's really interesting what we can do with just the tool aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's often you need to just change things up if you're in a rut, and using a different tool, I should imagine, absolutely does that.
So I'm just getting some of the colors loosely in. We got a little bit of a rainbow bright painting going on here, which is always fun. I always love when paintings go an interesting direction. I tell my students often, you want to get it to an ugly stage because that's typically where your best paintings are going to be. So.
And then out of them comes the beauty.
Yes, exactly. I need to get them ugly first. So.
So how much are you using the reference right now? Or what are you using the reference for?
Basically to give me my general shape. So the big shapes that I drew on, I have my reference sort of in front of me. And I am using it more just for placement of color right now. Not really for structure yet, because we just want to get that product on, but it helps with placement of color right now. And because we're dealing with such big textures, one of the nice things that we talked about at the plein air convention is we actually have quite a bit of working time by using acrylics in this sort of capacity. This is why I teach this way with plein air as well, because you do have some ability to, really play with the colors and play with your textures. So I'm going to downgrade my palette knife a little bit. I'll go a little bit smaller just to start maneuvering in some of these colors. We've kind of got the basics done. I do want to get a bit of a darker tone in here, which can be a little bit challenging with an acrylic, getting it dark because my products are actually quite opaque. So this is the product by itself. and this is the color that it is. So it is quite opaque. So we do have to add quite a bit more color to it to get it darker and to get sort of a tonal variations as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start with that focal point, really wanting to make sure that this is the highlight of my piece and getting this really sort of the interesting part to the painting. I'm going to tighten up a little bit here to get some of those details in place. Also really nice with your acrylics and working on a panel is we can always scrape back into the panel as well to showcase that underpainting. So I didn't do the orange underpainting for nothing. It definitely has a purpose. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, kind of pulling in some of these textures. Really sort of, again, pulling that movement, sort of creating some of these internal structures that help me define a little bit of the space here. I'm just going to shift a teeny bit because I see you got a nice
little bit of glare on that focal point, but yeah, so, I think it's going to be tricky to get rid of it all.
Yeah, that is the one problem with your acrylics is they're shiny. Again, sort of pulling all of these brighter colors, really sort of giving myself a starting point of that focal area by using some of the colors. This is also a little bit more transparent. So we're seeing the green is a little bit more transparent here, which is quite nice to work with. So having a little bit of transparency, though I'm using an opaque molding paste, we can get some transparency from it, which is quite cool. So we could see just that little bit of transparency helps us with areas like that.
Yeah, you get the luminosity from the ground that comes through, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's quite lovely, and it's nice to be able to use a panel support for that. I find your canvases, it's a little bit more challenging to sort of pull out the color, but I have been working on linen canvases recently, which have a little bit of a bigger weave to them, which can help as well. They don't absorb quite as much, so that's quite nice. Now I've got a lot of this really beautiful purple in the sky. I don't want to be only having it there, so I do want to pull a little bit of those colors back into the ground as well, just so that we're pulling some of the reference colors from the sky into the ground as well, so it has some connection to it. And then, of course, I'm going to try to pull a little bit more movement here, so I do need some darks. You can definitely tell we're kind of riding in that mid-tone right now. We don't have a lot of darks. We kind of have a lot of mid-tone colors. So playing around with adding some mid-tones, again, having to mix in a little bit more paint to my products just to get it a little bit darker, because right now we're quite light. So.
And your paint seems quite pure. I mean, obviously you're creating the transitions by blending like you're doing right now, but the paint that you've got on the palette looks like it's, you know, fairly pure pigment plus the molding paste.
Yeah, so I'm mixing a little bit. I add a lot more of the sort of the dirtier tinted colors as I go along, because I do find like you need your neutrals for quite a few areas, and really finding the space for your neutrals takes a little bit of time. So it is a bit challenging in the beginning to find those neutrals and where they need to be. But I really want to, of course, create that focal point and make sure that all of the work that I'm doing is helping you get to that focal point as the viewer, as well as for myself to just make sure that's sort of the main area.
Okay.
So I'm going to mix up sort of a darker tone here. I am adding quite a bit more color to get a dark. So I'm adding a little bit of the phthalo in. The phthalo colors obviously are some of your more pigmented colors in your acrylic lineup, so they are going to help you with getting darks, as well as some of the quinacridones together. So I'm using quite a dark green here just to get some balance of the color, just to help me out with getting that dark into the piece. So I'll get some of my darks in here.
And as you lay that in, does it pick up a lot of what's below it?
No, I'm using my palette knife and hovering above it. So you can see I'm just basically layering it on top. With acrylics, kind of the interesting thing here is that we don't really have a limit to the thickness, and we also don't have as many rules. So with your oils, you have rules on what can go on top of what.
Right, the drying time.
Exactly. This basically, all of my acrylics are going to dry relatively similarly in time. All that's going to change is actually the thickness will sort of challenge my drying time, as well as your own humidity level. So your humidity level is huge with acrylics, because if you are, say, in any of the Carolinas, you're going to be dealing with a slower drying time because everything dries by evaporation. So we have that, you know, slow sort of encouragement of the water to get out of the paint. So it's all dependent on your drying time.
Got it.
So we're adding some of the darks in here. Just to give myself some placement, sort of helps me out. Now I do find this a little rainbow bright-ish, so I'm going to tone it down a little bit. Not that I don't enjoy rainbow paintings, but we do need to make it a little bit more artistically relevant rather than super placed out in terms of color. So I will add in a little bit of a lighter tone. So I'm going to be adding in a light purple here, just to sort of balance out some of that white. And that'll really help me get a stronger sort of color tone in here. And also contrast that yellow that we have in there as well.
And do you deliberately change your mark making for above the horizon line versus below?
Yeah, so as I go, I sort of play around with how do I want the piece to come together? So how am I pulling people in? And I'm going to move around my marks according to that. So typically with the sky, because our sky here is not as important as the rest of the piece, I'm going to keep my marks relatively simple. And then where I want people to look, I might add some even reticulating marks. So I sort of use a palette knife and even create like little lines in the paint so that you can see a little bit more of where my focus needs to be and where I want you to look. So I do change depending on sort of how I want the viewer to experience the painting. Now, this is all sort of conceptual thinking of how a viewer should experience the painting, but in my head, I really want to walk them through this space and create sort of a space for them to land in the painting.
Right. Yeah, it's very focal point driven.
Yes, absolutely. And that way too, I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of some of the earlier marks, some of the looser marks, and you can say, okay, well, this just aids my narrative in creating the main focal point. So how do this doesn't need to be as important as the other ones do.
I love the fearlessness with which you're going about it. It's, I think, something that a lot of people can learn from. It's you're just having a crack and seeing if it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Working with texture, it seems scary because you're adding in all of this stuff. But you know what? Cost savings wise, this is actually a cheaper method if you're going to apply texture using a molding paste, using something like that. It's actually cheaper than if you were to do this with your beautiful oil paints. It's going to be very expensive. This is cost savings wise really great. And if, say, this painting fails and doesn't work, I can actually sand it down and continue to paint on top of it, which is really quite lovely as well.
Yeah. And so you just put a big daub of something that looked to us like it was white, but was that just more molding paste?
Yeah, you bet. So it just transitions in. Basically, I needed a little bit more paint on the surface. So I was able to just grab some molding paste, add it in, and then you're able to really get a little bit more product. Basically, that's all I'm doing. So. And with these, if you really struggle with your drying time with your acrylics, you can switch to a slow drying acrylic as well. So you don't have to use the quick drying acrylics. You could do slow drying as well. And then you have a bit more working time as well. So they do give it sort of like a 10 times the working time of traditional acrylics if you go with the slower drying ones.
So you've been working for about 15, 20 minutes. Has any of the original paint you put on started to set up?
Nope.
Okay. So this is still right now, like, it's still got the same kind of feel as if you were painting this in oil.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, one of the neat things about acrylics like this is they will actually look very similar to your oils once they're dry as well, because they don't have that acrylic shine.
Right.
And using a molding paste that has that satin finish, so you're going to end up with it feeling a little bit more like an oil anyway. And then because of that, you always confuse the viewer a little bit, which is nice as an acrylic painter because it's never viewed quite as highly as oils sometimes. And I think there are definite pluses to it. So
yeah.
Alrighty, so we're gonna get moving into this middle section here. I'll leave the sky at its ugly phase, and we're gonna get this part sort of decided and cleaned up. And I'm gonna use a brush just to show you that you can use brushes in this as well. I'm using sort of a stiffer bristle than, obviously no natural hair brushes. I would say just something a little bit stiffer just to get your acrylics in. I, again, really love using both brush and palette knife, just so we're not looking completely like the whole painting's done in a palette knife. I do want to have a little bit of variation there. I'm just going to scrub a little bit of color on the bottom here just to create some interesting shapes. And again, pull in some of the darks, because we do have quite a few darks in my reference photo as well, sort of coming at different angles, and we want to play with those angles as well. Not be afraid to use the brush at all.
So we've moved from palette knife to brush.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's been lots of questions about your palette knife, Samantha. Everyone wants to know where they can get that big one.
You know what? These are actually all available at art supply stores. They're not even, they're not even fancy. These are just Italian made. They're big. Just go and research what your art supply store has, because I bet you they have them. It's just probably not a super easy to, or sorry, not difficult to find, because it is a very common size. And I do like the teardrop shape the best, personally. Just gives
because
you
then you got the straight edge, the point.
Yeah.
Do you ever use the butt end with the round part?
Like the very tip of them, or
the other side, like the shoulder.
Yeah, I use all of it. So I would like to say, like, because I've basically used them as just a tool for a long time, it's basically use all angles. I would like to say I use pretty much all of the palette knife itself.
Cool.
And again, I'm going to bring in some brighter colors here, just to get sort of a little bit more movement, but I can use sort of like the scraping in to get those lines a little bit more interesting, get a little bit more defined here. And then I'll just let your viewers know as well. I'll post the finished piece in my Instagram just so you can see when it dries, just that shift. There's not a big shift in color, but the shift in sheen is significant. So I always like showcasing that, because it's just so different once it's actually dry. All right, you want to get that horizon line all cleaned up. I'm going to use some lighter colors here. My brushes again. Get that horizon line in there. How am I doing for time? I'm doing good. All right.
Yeah, you're doing good. Yeah, you probably got about another 10-15 minutes. So
perfect.
We could do a second one.
Yes, we could, but that would require a lot more effort on my part.
No, I get it. You're doing amazing. So there were a few people, you mentioned that you'll post this onto your Instagram. It's probably a good time to say that you're going to need to get your digits out here for Samantha's handle, but it is at Samantha Williams-Chapelsky, no hyphens, no spaces. That's her Instagram. And you are great on Instagram. You do a lot of interesting things. You post a lot of interesting stories. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this one when you photograph and put it up on there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'm not afraid to, as I'm going along here, realistically, I could finish this piece today. I could also let it dry and come back to it. So I think it's with acrylics, there's so much potential for acrylics to have such an interesting finish to them. And I love playing around with what they can do as a medium. So, I do post a lot about just some of the products that I add in, some of the mediums, because I'm not using pure acrylic paint. Like, I'm not using a tube right now. I'm using sort of a combination. So. Right.
And so you're, just to remind people who have maybe didn't hear at the beginning, you are using pigment, like a heavy body acrylic paint, plus your modeling, or some people call it molding paste, and that's it.
You bet. Yeah, you bet. So that's how we're getting all the textures. That's how we're getting all the fun stuff. It's just by using those products together. And again, there's lots of variations of molding paste actually. So you have several different types to choose from all different brands of acrylics. So it's definitely a fun thing to add to your repertoire if you have not tried them and you're an acrylic artist. Or again, if you're oil, you can always use them underneath. So
yeah.
I'm going back and forth a little bit, jumping around a bit, just to sort of see if I can pull it together myself as I'm going. And I'll show you sort of one of my trademark ways of creating movement. It's quite fun. I showed this recently in one of my workshops, and a lot of my artists, they, it's a compositional trick, but it's a great way to create movement in a piece. So it is a lot of fun. It's always challenging if you're new to texture. I find acrylics can be a little challenging, especially if you're coming at it from an oil painter's perspective. But give them a shot. I've converted a lot of oil painters to acrylics simply on how they can plein air paint and take the piece home at the end of the day and not have to box it up and not worry too much about it.
Mm-hmm. And so you paint in a similar style when you're outside?
I do, yeah. So very similar. I switch my acrylics to a slower drying acrylic for that. So it is just a little bit slower on the general drying time, which is really easy to do. It doesn't really change anything for you. It just gives you a bit more working time.
So those are the open acrylics that you're using in the field.
Yeah.
And here in the studio, you're just using the ones that you're okay with this drying, because you've probably got fairly good humidity inside. It's not, you're able to work fast.
Yeah, and it's got time. Like everything that I've put on with you today, I mean, we're half an hour in, and basically everything is still very workable. So
yeah, great.
Add a little bit more of this brighter yellow in here, and you can see I'm just hovering it on the surface. Everything's still very, very wet. I can sort of mix everything up still, but I can also hover colors on the surface and create some really interesting effects as well. So I like playing around with that as well, because you can really see some of the interesting marks that you can make. It also is a little bit challenging to sort of not overdo it as an artist. I find because you have more working time and they're similar to your oils, you're going to want to play with them more, and they will get sticky at some point. So they're going to get a little bit on the stickier side.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of personal experimentation to find out what works for you with this kind of technique.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what tools you like, what tools you don't like. I think there's a lot of areas to maneuver and have some fun with. So it's kind of it's interesting to see what they can do. For me, like, I'm not loving the sky in this piece right now, and you can see me fighting away with it here. But it's you can see that I'm still able to work with it and move it, which I really love, the fact that you can do that. So I'm really able to sort of play in those neutrals, pull the colors together, and get some more neutrals showing up from my actual reference image as well, which is nice.
Yeah, I think it's working.
The neutrals do sort of really help, and this is in any type of painting. We need those, what you would deem as ugly colors. We need them so desperately in every painting. And we forget that just because you have access to all these beautiful brights and vivid colors. Sometimes you need those neutrals to really make the rest of it sort of pop.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like through blending now, you're getting more of those neutrals certainly into the sky.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess once are you trying to remember where your areas of purity are so that you hold on to them, or do you know that you can always layer more on?
You can always layer more on. So if you've lost it, you can always pull them back in. Again, sort of the plus and minus of working with acrylics is you're really not given an off time. You're able to sort of play with these even tomorrow once it's dry, because it'll be dry by tomorrow. I'm really able to, still be able to pull color on top and layer intentional rules with your acrylics. So you're really able to play with that. So I'm going to show a little bit of a cheater technique that I like using to create sort of another movement in space. And I often use sort of a Z-shaped composition in my work. So I do love that tool. And I do like to cheat a little bit with this one. So what I like to do is grab a color, so something like Even a yellow ochre is a nice color to use. And I will actually just grab a tube of paint for this because it works quite well. And I'm going to actually pull in my lines to help me with the actual composition part. So I'm actually able to create that Z right in. This also helps with movement. So it actually helps me get some general movement into the space. It's a little bit of like you're not having to paint it in, but I think it's a really fun way of creating space and structure.
So sorry, you use the end of the tube to scratch that?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this little guy here helps me out a little bit, and it's really fun to sort of pull, again, another tool in along with our brushes and our palette knives where we're sort of adding in a couple different tools just to create that movement through space.
Yeah, so definitely creates more organic shapes.
Exactly, and Z shapes are one of your easiest tools to use in a landscape composition because they basically give you a starting point and a finishing point, and they guide you through a space. So they're giving you basically the direction you need to walk to get through this space, which is really lovely. So I can see a little bit of my paint is drying on the bottom here. So we're starting to get a little bit more of the sort of dry finished product into the painting here. So we are going to have to sort of play with a little bit of the maneuvering of this. And again, like I said, I'll probably come back, finish it up once it's actually dry, add a little bit more to it. I do like to paint more all at once, all together, if I can, sort of my style of painting. But I can with studio paintings, we can obviously paint a little bit more into them. And I'm not afraid to use the back end of paintbrush as well. Those always work really well for tools. And you can see, we've got little bits of that bright yellow showing through. I don't want to leave tons of little chunky bits showing through, but I do want a little bit of that bright yellow underpainting popping out. But it's kind of interesting to see where it can sort of surface and where it works. And I always find that you kind of have to take a moment at some point in this painting and sort of simplify what works for you and what doesn't, just in terms of all of those marks that we've made, all of those interesting little bits and pieces. So I've got, again, that nice gray. I'm going to blend that into the orange a little bit so that we have a little bit more balance. And again, I'm going to use a little bit of like sort of a reticulating mark just to pull us into sort of that focal point again. We can even see some of the yellow from the underpainting really helps give that little bit of highlight here as well. So that's actually the underpainting that's doing that bright pop there, which is quite lovely. Again, this is not purely opaque, so your molding paints are not completely white. They are white with some transparency to them. So if we use them in thinner amounts, you can get a bit more transparency happening. If you use them in thicker amounts, obviously they're going to be more opaque. So you can really play around with that as well.
Yeah, it's looking great. It's looking super juicy.
It's very juicy, yes. That was one of my first sets of paintings I ever did. I called them Juicy, the Juicy series.
Yeah.
They were a lot of paint.
Yeah, there's some great painters working today in this kind of juicy style, and obviously from yesteryear. Your work really reminds me of 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗹𝗶𝗺𝗪 down in. She's from Santa Fe. I don't think she's with us anymore, but she did some beautiful scenes, quite kind of similar with these really kind of dramatic skies and the way they push towards a focal point. There's lots of good stuff going on here, but I think it's very interesting how you're building it using these acrylic techniques and working it from the looks of it very similarly to how you might work oil.
And we often want to say that acrylics are so different, but at the end of the day, how we're going to use them and paint with them is actually pretty similar. And we're just dealing with a little bit of a drying time difference, and obviously a finish difference. And if we can challenge that with something that has more of a satin finish, something that's got a little bit more visual interest, I think you'd be hard pressed to sort of know the difference between the two. And I know that's, blasphemy in the world of oils, but you know what? It's nice for artists to have the option if they, want to paint from a home studio. Your acrylics have no scent, right? You're not going to have to deal with solvents. You're not going to have to deal with that kind of cleanup. So it is an option that is there for you that I think if you know the tools and you know the tricks, you really have some fun things you can do with them.
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of adding a few little details here just so I can pull us into here. I have it sort of backwards on my screen, but we'll see when it's all dry how much more it needs. I find that with pieces like this, again, going back to that multiple choice test example, your first answer is usually the best one. So not going too far away from what we originally started and messing around with sort of the details too much, because we really want to highlight why and how we applied the paint to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting as well.
And when you're building a painting like this, how much of this is experimental and how much of this is planned?
Oh, I would say, 10% is planned and then the rest is experimental. I would love to say that you could plan every single aspect of this. And you saw me with the colors. I certainly did, plan the colors out ahead of time. But I feel like so much of this is also that emotional sort of way of painting. So how do we express this space in art? And because of that interpretation, we're kind of having to play with, well, I like this mark over this one. This area seems more important. So maybe that original plan kind of goes away and doesn't become as important, which is fine. And I think that's often the case with painting in general.
Right on.
So I think, for me at this point, I'm kind of at a point where, I'm playing with colors, playing with areas that probably need a little bit more cleaning up, if anything. So pulling in some brighter colors, brighter whites again will be essential for this piece once it's sort of dried a little bit more. But other than that, I'm probably at a phase where this is where this piece is wanting to go. So this is probably where it'll stay as a landscape.
Cool. And so and then if you wanted to work back into it, you're saying that you would want to work back after it's set up a little bit and dried a bit?
A little bit, yeah. So it's getting a little on the sticky side for me. So once it's getting sticky, we kind of hit a certain point, especially near the bottom here. Once that stickiness comes into play, then we kind of have to let it dry because acrylics do tend to skin over. And breaking that is never enjoyable. It doesn't ever look nice again. So kind of want to avoid that area of it if possible. So kind of clean up the areas that I can while it's still wet and then let it dry and come back to it. Nice thing too with your acrylics, unlike your oils, oftentimes you don't have to varnish these if you're using a good brand of acrylic. Varnish is not necessarily a requirement because it's all sealed in plastic. So you're kind of dealing with a little bit less work on the back side of this too when you're done the piece, which is quite fun. Yes, and I saw a comment in the chat there. The squeegees are a real thing. Squeegees are fun. They're great tools as well.
That's incredible. You're doing this painting and you're following the chat. I'm watching you. I can barely follow the chat.
No, it's a I don't know, Charlie, about you, but I feel like it's been a whirlwind of Zoom the past few years. And
all right, you've developed a mind that can multitask.
Yes, it's a talent.
Yeah, I got it.
Probably not a good one to have, but that's okay.
Oh no, it's looking great. Yeah, we just got a couple more minutes more anyway, but this is looking fantastic.
Yeah, so again, we definitely have like the movement. We know where we want to look. I think, for this area here, this is pretty much setting up top. I probably want to get this a little bit darker just to create some sort of, again, not that I'm looking for a natural perspective, but some sort of perspective. So some sort of darker gradient up top will help me with that, rather than having just all solid one color.
Yeah.
But other than that, we kind of have the general movement, and I'd probably simplify this down using one of my larger tools at some point just to get this a little bit more loose. This feels very tight to me, so not something I love.
What I like, I've noticed that a couple of times you've picked up some paint off an area and used it somewhere else. It's like almost you've got your palette is the canvas.
Well, and you know, I should show you the palette at the end here, or closer to the end. Is it's not pretty. They all mix together. It's not a structured palette way of painting, and that is my own personal preference. I think everyone has their own way of working. I find no matter how, you know, loose I am, or sorry, plein air-ish I am, I'm still going to use the palette the same way. So
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of like make it work for you.
Yeah. And then, yeah, it's fascinating. It's great to see. And I often use the analogy about acrylic paint drying. You're talking about how it's kind of getting sticky. I always say it's kind of like that drunk in a bar fight. Like as soon as it starts fighting, he's going to take everyone else down. So sometimes you just got to back away and get out of the bar.
Yeah, well, and you know, I think that's something that, you know, as instructors, we've often told our students, and probably we need to tell ourselves more often than not, is just when to walk away and to let it go, you know,
Right.
and to let it be, and that's fine. You know, that's half the fun of acrylic painting is you can come back to it, but you maybe want to take a little bit of a break.
Yeah. Right. But look at the edges that you're creating now as you drag across that sort of semi-dry surface.
Yeah,
There's some really interesting, very active edges.
well, and it's just a little bit more visually interesting. I find when I get too tight as an artist, that's when you need to take out the tools. I had this professor who was actually British in university who would say sometimes you're just polishing a turd at some point, and you need to just change it up a little bit. Use
Lipstick on a pig, absolutely.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd probably play around with this a little bit more and create a little bit looseness up here, but
it's looking fantastic. I really enjoy the playfulness of it, the dynamism of it, and I think judging from all the comments that I'm reading, I think everyone's really appreciated seeing some different techniques here, and I think certainly people want to know more. So you should all, everyone watching online, go and check out Samantha Williams-Chapelsky.com and also at Samantha Williams-Chapelsky on the Instagram, and you'll be able to see where she ends up with this painting and many more in the similar kind of fashion. So thank you so much for joining us today, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me. Super appreciate it. And as always, Charlie, so love your work as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And for anyone that wants to check out my work, as I think I mentioned, if I didn't, it was a mistake. Check out at Charlie Easton on Instagram or charlieeaston.com. And you'll actually see there's a few pieces that I've done that probably could do with a bit of Samantha's chunkiness as she's put it together for us today. There's certainly a few pieces that I'm going to look to go back and find my molding paste or my modeling paste. So thank you to Samantha. And I've just got a couple of announcements that I'm going to make. And we've also got an update from Eric, so stick around. So where am I? Yeah, we've got a great offer for all of you. There is an amazing free video that if you haven't downloaded it already, because I told you to do it yesterday, but if you haven't done it already, go and check out 97artsecrets.com /free and go and get this incredible video. It's just little tips and secrets that you're going to be able to improve your art with. So go to that. Eric's put that together for you. So take advantage of that. Another thing that I want to mention is do register for Realism Live. Realism is, I think some people often think of it as purely photo realistic, but really there's a lot of impressionist painters that are going to be attending that paint in a beautiful, tight, realistic way. It's a 3-day virtual event. There's an optional essential techniques day. With art instruction, demonstrations. I mean, you only need to look at the list of people who are going to be attending. There's some really good ones. There's a couple on here that I've totally been nerding out about recently. I won't say who those are because then they'll go, oh, you nicked that technique and put it in your own work. So anyway, there's lots of great people that are going to be at Realism Live. But also, if you don't know about this already, and there was lots of comments I saw today in the session asking about Acrylic Live. And Acrylic Live, I'm going to be co-hosting it with Eric between March 26th and 28th of next year. And there's going to be an optional Essentials Day on the 25th. But we've got a great lineup of artists that are going to be attending and teaching at Acrylic Live, and I'm sure we're going to get into some of the mediums and the techniques that Samantha was sharing with you today. But we've got Carla Bosch, we got 𝗪𝗺𝗺, Mike Hernandez, 𝗄𝗶𝗵𝗺, and a whole bunch of other people as well. I'll be demoing, doing some plein air work on it as well. But go to acryliclive.com and check that out, because that's going to be a really good one. That's the first Acrylic Live that Streamline is organizing. So I think we're going to have fun with that one. And I know that a lot of people have been asking about more acrylic techniques, which is great, because I think they provide another good string to the artistic bow that we have as artists. So, as I mentioned, where's Eric? We don't know where he is, or do we? Let's find out.
World am I am in Virginia City. You've heard of Virginia City if you ever watched Bonanza back, in the old days. Anyway, Virginia City is this beautiful old original Western town, and it's got incredible old buildings, a lot of funky old things, and it's got some great old churches. And I'm walking over right now, and you're going to get a chance to see some of the scenery from Virginia City. So this is where we're going to be doing the plein air convention one day. We'll be painting here when we come out to Tahoe and Reno. I've been doing site selections all day today, found some beautiful places, and this is one of the places we're going to come. But if you look behind me, look at that behind me, that beautiful scenery. There's so much to paint here. There's an old church if you wanted to paint an old church. There's just all these old buildings behind me, and it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be some old miners around, and there's always a guy with his donkey, and just spectacular, but beautiful, beautiful views everywhere we go. And so, look, I'd like to paint that balcony up there. Look at that balcony behind me. It's just kind of falling apart. Anyway, that's where I am, and I miss you guys, and I'll be back in another week and a half or so, but I'm going to be judging the 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗹𝗶 event this week. I'm going to Los Angeles tomorrow in 24 hours, and then I'll be judging 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗹𝗶 throughout the weekend. Then I'm going to the 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗹𝗶 International watercolor event, and I'll be speaking there, and then I'll be coming back to my studio, and I'll see you then. That's where we are. See you.
Fantastic. Well, I will definitely be painting that old man and a donkey, and I'll be hoping for my money back if I don't get one. Eric, that is a beautiful place that you've gone to there. And I saw also on your Facebook Live that there was some stunning scenes in and around Lake Tahoe. So yeah, that's going to be a great event at the plein air convention down in Reno and Lake Tahoe next year. Lots of variety, so that's gonna be great. And yeah, thanks to everyone for tuning in today. I really enjoyed the demo from Samantha Williams-Chapelsky. Follow her online at Samantha Williams-Chapelsky on Instagram, or SamanthaWilliamsChapelsky.com. And as I said, I'm Charlie Easton, charlieeaston.com. Check out my work if you fancy it. And I really appreciate all the comments that have been coming in throughout, and also the comments that we've received from that great demo that we had from 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗹𝗶𝗺 yesterday. We got Rich Gallego tomorrow. We're going to have fun. We got lots of good people this week. So stick around, and thanks again for tuning in to Art School Live with me, Charlie Easton.